Hi all, welcome to this afternoon session, Bot Wars, Power Virtual Agents versus Bot Framework by Tom Morgan. We're going to look at the questions at the end of the session, so please just paste them in the Q&A section and I'll publish them so Tom can focus on them at the end, and then we'll have a breakout session afterwards. But I'll hand over to you now, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming to Commsverse. If you follow the history of Commsverse, it's been a while getting here, but I'm really pleased we're here. I think from everything I've heard from everyone so far, it's been a really kind of good and engaging conference. So thanks very much for being here. Got to say a massive thank you to all of the people on this list, the sponsors who've. I know what it's like putting on a conference. I know what it's like on the sponsor side as well. Like, to hang in this long as we've been through changes of dates and changes from in person to online. So big thank you to these sponsors, and just pay them some love, see what they do, go and talk to them, say hello, because actually what they're doing is kind of keeping this whole community we've got going on, and that's kind of really interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk about bots. Why are we going to talk about bots today? So bots are becoming this really important way of communicating. And if that wasn't obvious before, you know, I've been talking about this for maybe a year, something like that, say how bots are coming, how they're becoming the new app, how they're kind of replacing some of the things apps are doing. What we've seen in the last 6 months or so is actually Microsoft really double down on bots and how bots are consumed by users. Why is this? Well, if you've got a user, if they can talk to a bot, suddenly what you're doing is making it easier for them to access different systems that they would otherwise have to go and switch context, close one window, open another window, in the worst kind of cases, switch networks, get off back onto the corporate Wi-Fi to go and access these legacy systems. What you can do with bots is you're really just facilitating the communication flow, and you're making it easier for users to get access to information they need and to perform actions that they want to take, and you're just making things easier. If you think about boiling it down to what bots are, really, they're nothing kind of more sophisticated than a command line. They're just a bit more intelligence in taking things like English and what your local language is and understanding the context and the intent of what you're trying to do. But really, they're just a different interface to systems. The really kind of key thing, though, is when you've got users talking to bots like this, what you can do is wrap that whole experience inside of Microsoft Teams, and then users are able to stay inside Teams to do the work that they need to get done. And that enables them to be just more productive, enables them to kind of achieve more, and just makes it everything easier for them. They're not constantly switching context all the time. All right, so last year at Ignite 2019, the last in-person conference I went to, Microsoft announced 2 different and separate ways to graphically create bots. They announced Bot Framework Composer and they announced Power Virtual Agents. They did both of these at the same conference. So you are forgiven if you're slightly confused by all of this, because now there's 2 different ways to create bots graphically. Are they doing the same thing underneath? Which one should you use when? Which one is better? So I'm going to show you both of them, and I'm going to focus in on each one. I'm going to focus in on the kind of what they're good at and their kind of key points. And then I'm going to try and bring it together at the end and give you some pointers to help you understand like which one does best where, and just kind of how to decide between them. So let's start with Bot Framework Composer first. But before we get into Bot Framework Composer, let's just step back a bit and get everyone on the same page with the bot framework. So Bot Framework is a Microsoft framework. It's designed to help you build bots. It does this by basically giving you a platform, like an abstraction, because bots are not just something that happen in Microsoft Teams. They also happen in lots of other different platforms as well. You can embed bots into your web page. You can talk to them with Skype for Business or Slack or Twilio, via SMS. There's lots and lots of different ways in which you can communicate with bots. And so what the bot framework attempts to do is abstract all of that from you as a developer. So you write your code against the bot framework, then you don't have to worry about the weird and wonderful implementation details of why Facebook Messenger talks to its bots slightly differently to how Microsoft Teams talks to its bots, which is different again to how you do SMS, right? So you don't have to worry about any of that. You write your code against bot framework, and then you just hook in different channels that you want your bot to appear on. So that's a really good tool for developers to really build bots that work in lots of different places. Because it's Azure based and sort of Microsoft backed, it works really well with the Microsoft Cognitive Services stack, which is important because that gives you access to LUIS, which is the Language Understanding Intelligence Service. That's kind of key in making really nice bots, because that's the thing that can take just a regular sentence and figure out what it is the user's trying to achieve, and helps you make bots that seem kind of a bit more intelligent than they might be. So that's kind of the bot framework. So we're going to write our code against the bot framework, and then we'll just enable it out for these other channels. One thing that is interesting and worth mentioning is that recently the bot framework announced support for both Amazon Alexa and also Google Home. So that's pretty exciting, because those are just as channels. So I already had some bots I'd written in bot framework. I could go back into them. I ticked a box to say make this work on Alexa. I had to do a little bit of thing on the Alexa side, on the Amazon side, but really it was a case of like signing up for a developer account and then hooking the two things together. I didn't have to write any new code. Suddenly my bots are working on Alexa. So I've got a blog post about doing that, because I made a Teams presence bot. So everyone else in my family could ask our Alexa devices, which we've got strewn around the house, what I was doing, and it would interrogate my Teams presence status and say whether I was on a call, whether I was busy, whether I was in Do Not Disturb, or whether I was available. Just one way in which this household is trying to kind of cope with everybody being in the same building 24/7. Anyway, so that's the bot framework. It's come quite a long way. I've been talking about it for quite a long time. So I used to do a talk a bit like this. It was 60 minutes long. So this is back in 2017 when I first started talking about the bot framework. And I did a 60-minute long demo of building a bot from scratch. It was a Weatherbot, I think. So building Weatherbot from scratch. And it took pretty much the whole 60-minute session to do that, because the whole thing was pretty much me writing code and trying to talk and explain as I went. It was pretty terrifying, if I'm honest, and probably fairly boring for most people who are watching it. As you can see in the picture, I actually brought my own keyboard to events to give this talk, because it was that much code I had to write just to kind of tie everything together and just make it work. So that was 3 years ago. Why am I showing this? Well, I want to kind of show the evolution of where bot framework has come, because it's got kind of easier and easier to do the really common things using bot framework. So I'm going to try and sell it to you in stages. So that was 2017. Come forward a bit, 2018 and sort of 2019, that kind of time frame. That same session, that same process of building Weatherbot was down to 30 minutes. Why? Well, mostly because a lot of the bot framework creation code had moved into Azure, and it was a thing that you could go to the Azure portal and create a Azure Bot Service resource, and that made things really easy, because you could just get started with a template and just modify that template as you went. So that's exactly what I did. I started with a template and I modified it to make it work as a Weatherbot. That really helped, and it really brought the kind of development time right down to kind of 30 minutes. Still involved lots of writing, lots of code, and yeah, it was okay, but the feedback was like, this is all right, but actually what I was trying to tell people and trying to get people interested in is that you didn't have to be a really hardcore developer to write bot framework code. And that whole presentation kind of fell flat a bit, because I started out saying you can use the bot framework and you don't need to be a developer, and you can write all these brilliant bots to get things done in your organization. And then I got into the demo, and about 20 minutes into the demo, I was writing code like on the screen, and I kind of lost people a bit because they said, well, you told me you didn't have to write any code. And it was kind of true. There was still definitely bits that you needed to write the code. So let's bring it all the way up to the announcement last year. And that is the Bot Framework Composer. What is the Bot Framework Composer? So it layers on top of the existing Bot Framework stuff that I've been talking about, and it's a nice UI. Okay, you can go and get it from the Windows Store. It's you drag. It's a bit like, it looks a little bit like Flow or Power Automate in that you drag these composable parts onto a working area to build up a bot. Now, the way that works is you're actually writing Bot Framework code under the hood. Okay, so the composer is literally giving you a graphical way to represent the same code. So you pull these bits together, you can test it with a nice emulator. If you want to, you can build the whole thing using this kind of drag and drop interface, and it's really powerful. And you can do all that, and you can produce a bot that way, and you can be done. Or at any point, you can take what you've started and you can drop into code. You can download a zip file with a solution in it that's all nicely hooked up and it's got decent code in it. And you can take that code and then iterate on it. That's really important because now this whole Bot Framework Composer, even if you're watching this and thinking, well, that's great, but actually I know lots about Bot Framework. I don't need a stupid composer. I can do my stuff anyway. Doesn't matter. Take this. Because if there's something in here in one of these composable parts you've not done before, whether that's calling an API or whether it's authenticating the user or a complicated conditional loop or something, you can build it up in here and then download the code and see how they've done it, because they're writing kind of best practice Bot Framework code that might be quite useful. So it's kind of useful for both sides of the fence, whether or not you are a kind of hardcore developer, professional developer, I think Microsoft likes to call it now, or whether you're not, there's still something in here for you for Bot Framework Composer. So let's look at building that Weatherbot using Bot Framework Composer. What would it look like? Well, you can create any number of intent flows with the Bot Framework Composer, and really you tie those to things, intents that the user might have. There's a couple of different ways you can do this in the composer. The easy way is just using regex. Okay, and so that's what I've done on the screen here. In the top right hand corner, you can see there's a trigger phrase of weather. So if the user types weather, we go into this flow, and that's fine, but it's not like super intelligent, is it? The other thing you can do is hook it into Lewis. So there's deep support in Composer for Lewis. So you tell it you're going to use Lewis, you set it up with your Lewis account, and then you can go and use Lewis to generate all those utterances, the entities, and everything you need to do to build a kind of intelligent natural language processing system, which is kind of outside the scope of this talk, but is very interesting. And then all of this stays the same. All you're really doing is changing how the user gets to this flow. So you can have multiple of these different intents. And then you can drag in these bits that I've done. So you can see the first thing I've done is just ask the user. So in our Weatherbot, we want to ask the user where they want the weather for. And then we're going to store that, the next box down, the blue one, we're just going to store that in a variable. And then we're going to make an HTTP request. And this is one of the reasons I always use a Weatherbot as a demo example, because it's really simple, right? Everybody understands what a Weatherbot does. You ask it a question, or you ask it, tell you on the weather in a particular place, and it gives you the weather. And that's not very useful for lots of people, especially in organizations. There's not that much demand for the weather. But it's a good example because really what we're doing when we say we're getting the weather is we're just calling an API endpoint. And actually in businesses, in processes, lots of the time, that is what bot automations are. They're just calling API endpoints to get stuff done. So this is kind of my go-to demo example, because it nicely, like if you understand this, then actually you can reuse this to do not just the weather, all sorts of other things as well. So That's send an HTTP request. That's just a thing that you can do inside the Bot Framework Composer. You just kind of hit the button and you tell it what you want to do, and I'll show you. So we got to this point where we asked a question and we got to the storing the answer. You then press the little kind of click on the little plus button at the bottom, and it gives you this nice menu. And you can see here the kind of things that you can do. These are built into the Bot Framework Composer. Create nice conditions, do some looping, access external resources. So send an HTTP request. That's the thing I want to do. And then you can see also support for things like OAuth login and those other sort of slightly more complicated things that you might kind of shy away from if you were doing the whole thing in code. So sending an HTTP request, you click that, you get the options on the right hand side. I'm just going to put in my API endpoint, and I'm going to, the thing you can't see actually is I've just passed in this dialog.location as the part of the URI string. That just ensures that I get the weather nicely sort of for the area that I'm interested in. And then the only other thing I've done is put the result property. So if you look down here, result property goes into a new variable dialog.weatherdata. All that's going to do is just when the information about the weather comes back from the API response, it's going to put it into that property. That then means that I can carry on a bit further. I do a check for a 200 result, and if I don't get one of those, I just send a response back that said something went wrong because this isn't a very intelligent bot. And if it was right, I just pull out the actual weather data from the content of the API call, and then I send the message back to the user. So actually, this whole demo, if I was to do this right now in Bot Framework Composer, it's kind of not even worth doing as a demo anymore. What used to be a 60-minute demo and then became a 30-minute demo kind of forms a kind of 5-10 minute part of a bigger talk. And that's kind of testament to the effort that's gone into the bot framework in the past couple of years. It's really kind of ramped up. It's become more powerful. It's become sort of, it can do a lot more, and this composer kind of really helps that because it's opening up to kind of more people. And there's definite choices. Like you don't have to think of this just as a development tool. For instance, you could sit down, you could see how you might sit down with a business owner or somebody who understands the business and the process of the business and go through this on the screen and make sure that, you know, it all makes sense. You know, are we doing the right thing? Is this flow correct? And so these graphical tools can be really useful in sort of helping non-technical people understand how these bots are put together and how they work. So that is Bot Framework Composer, right? Full stop, new paragraph. So what about Power Virtual Agents? So they are also new, also announced at Ignite 2019. They are part of the Power Platform. So in all the kind of marketing and all the press release stuff, you'll hear them talked about as part of the Power Platform. So that's Power BI, Power Automate, what's Flow. Feel like there's another one, but I can't think what it is. Doesn't matter. They are also a UI for building bots. Okay, so this is where it starts to get confusing because we've already got one and now we've got another one. But bear with me. This is very much pitched as a no-code solution to building bots. Okay, I would say Bot Framework Composer is not an entirely no-code solution. You can use it like that, but it's a abstraction to writing code. You just don't realize you're writing code. I think of Power Virtual Agents as a much more no-code solution. The secret weapon, if you like, for Power Virtual Agents is that they can directly execute flows. So Power Automate flows. And that can be really powerful if you've got, you know, and you've built up Power Automate flows that do things in your organization, and you want to make it easier for users to kick those off without needing to, you know, go to the Power Apps website, or like, you know, you don't want to build a whole Power App just to gather some input and execute a flow, or you want to do something a bit more complicated than just the flow buttons. So this is where a bot can really come in handy for gathering and having that interaction with the user via flows. These can publish to teams. I did talk about it with Bot Framework as well. They can also, Teams is just one of the channels the Bot Framework can use. Power Virtual Agents can go directly to Teams. They can also publish to Skype and the other things that the Azure Bot Service can do. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. They lean on each other and there's a lot of crossover. I'd say, but probably they can't natively do it. It's a sort of a couple of hoops to jump through. It's one of those areas that I think over time we'll see it get a little bit smoother and slicker, but because this is just GA now, there's some kind of rough edges. Important point about Power Virtual Agents is that it's cost to license. So there is a cost to using it. There isn't inherently a cost to using the Bot Framework Composer other than the Azure resource that you're consuming whilst you're running your bot. And that's still a cost, but it's not quite as overt. Power Virtual Agents is licensed. It's a per tenant license. So just something to be aware of in making the kind of thinking about the two things. So how would you create a Weatherbot using Power Virtual Agents? Okay, so Power Virtual Agents looks a lot like Power Automate. So you go to a website that looks a bit like Power Automate and the interaction is kind of similar. It looks like it's from the same family, the same breed, because it kind of is. It's all part of that Power Platform. There are a number of existing what are called topics. So you start with a topic. Your bot has a topic, a number of different topics. There's lots that come out of the box. You can see them on the screen, and they cover some common scenarios. So you may well find that actually the thing you came here to write has already been written for you, and then you've got even less work to do. You can also write a new topic from scratch, and so that's what I decided to do. So I clicked on new topic at the top. You then give it some kind of trigger phrases, which I've got at the top there, such as kind of showing the weather, what's the weather. That kind of lines up a little bit to intents in Bot Framework. And then again, it's a kind of similar process of creating these composable parts to go and do things, except that, so I've asked my question about where do you want to get the weather for? There's a bit more intelligence here because in Bot Framework land, I just took in a string as my answer. Now, at that point, I could have checked it against maybe Lewis to see if it's a valid city. Lewis has that capability, or I could check it against some other database I had to see if it's a valid city. I didn't do any of those things because it just makes the code a bit more complicated. In here, however, I can just choose an identifier. It's already built in as a city, so that makes things a little bit easier to deal with. That then handles all that. This is not a city, we don't like it as a city, it's misspelt, whatever, means that my code is simpler because I know what I'm going to get back is a city. So I can send the user a message, and then here's the kind of really killer feature, I think, for me in Power Virtual Agents, which is this bit where I can call an action and I can just go and create a flow. So I did this earlier, which is why I have this get weather and return to PBA flow available to me. But if I didn't have that, I'd just go and click create a flow. It would drop me into Power Automate with two special actions at the sort of start and the end. One is to take in variables that my flow needs, and the other is to output values at the end to give back to Power Virtual Agents. And then inside this flow, I'm just doing exactly the same thing of making that HTTP recall, parsing the JSON, and then returning the information I need out of it. And then I'm just creating this thing called response, which I'm sending back to Power Virtual Agents to give it the nice message that goes back to the user. The other nice thing about this is that all the business logic here happens inside Flow. The Power Virtual Agent is really just kind of the setup, gathering the information and dealing with sending the message to the user. That means that if you already have lots of Power Automate flows and you have people who are used to going to Power Automate to kind of tinker with the process of how stuff gets done in the business, this just becomes another one of those and sits alongside them. So that's what the flow looks like. And then back in Power Virtual Agent land, you can see on the left-hand side how you call that flow gets called. And then you have these steps where you basically just kind of tie together the inputs and the outputs between Power Virtual Agents and Flow, meaning that you get that nice response to send back to the user. And then on the right hand side, that's how it looks to the end user. I didn't put in a screenshot of what it looks for Bot Framework. It's kind of basically exactly the same. It's as you imagine it to be. This is just the one from Power Virtual Agents. Either would have kind of been fine, but yeah, two kind of different approaches to solving the same problem. And that's the kind of overall thing around Bot Framework and Power Virtual Agents. They both solve the same problem in subtly different ways. So, as per the title of the talk, which one should you use when? The answer, classic consulting question, well, it depends. So, on the left-hand side, the Bot Framework gives you the ultimate control. On the right-hand side, Power Virtual Agents, speed of execution. The best way I can think about this, and the best way I can kind of describe this, as the heavens open in my noisy conservatory, is think about kind of building a website. So I used to build websites, kind of not really ever for a living, but I definitely used to build my own website and my first blog and everything like that. That gives you the ultimate in control. You can put whatever you want on the screen. If you want a particular feature, you can write it yourself, you can put it in. That's great. What I found really quickly is that if I wanted to maintain a blog, I was spending 90% of my time fiddling with my website and 10% of the time actually writing blog posts. And I wanted to invert that because otherwise I wasn't going to have a blog. So I gave up some element of control. You know, I went to a managed provider of websites, WordPress, right? So go to WordPress, you still get quite a lot of control, but you definitely get speed of execution. The idea is you can focus much more on your kind of blog posts. And it's kind of the same, I think of it kind of the same thing between, say, Bot Framework and Power Virtual Agents. On the one, you've got loads and loads of control because it's code, it's your code, you can make it do whatever you want, versus speed of execution on the right hand side. There are some other things to consider as well. So for instance, think about who's going to be looking after these bots. Is it going to be you, the developer, the creator in your organization? Is that the person that's going to be looking after the bots? Or would you rather the kind of day-to-day changing the process of how the bot works to keep up with the business? Would you rather that was done by somebody more inside the business and slightly less technical and didn't require opening up the code each time to get it done? In that kind of instance, maybe Power Virtual Agents is kind of a better choice. Considering things like time, if it lines up, you know, with what you're trying to do, Power Virtual Agents can be massively faster than doing it in Bot Framework. Think about cost. Bot Framework is essentially free, apart from the Azure spend. Power Virtual Agents cost you a license. But think about things like, I talked about extensibility, but long-term maintenance as well. Bot Framework Composer kind of falls somewhere in the middle on this scale of things because, you know, it makes it easier. It takes it slightly away from it being absolute kind of dev control. It does bring it much more into the business space. I'd say not quite as far as Power Virtual Agents does in terms of citizen users creating and managing content, but it's a really nice middle ground for devs and business process people to sit down together and understand how code works and understand the process that they're building up. The other thing is that Power Virtual Agents would be really good for proof of concepts where you don't have the time, or you don't want to spend the time, but you do just want to find out if something is worth doing even. So you want to write a bot for your organization to, I don't know, automate the process of ordering coffee in the morning. Is that a thing people actually want to do? Or do they quite like the process of ordering coffee that they currently have going on? So if you don't know the answer to that, doing something really quickly to figure it out, like a proof of concept, maybe you do something that is 50% functional in PVA, right? And then if it's a massive hit, you come back and have a look at it in Bot Framework. So there's always different ways of kind of solving these problems and different processes and different like approaches you could take. So there is something else you can do as well. So this hopefully helps in kind of determining which one to use when, and the answer kind of can depend a little bit on what it is you're trying to do. However, there is one more thing, he says. Right. Actually, why not use both? So what do I mean by that? Well, under the hood, both models use what's called the adaptive dialogue, and both models use skills. So adaptive dialogue is the kind of process of the messages that go to users, the nice cards that you see, the layout and all the rest of it. Under the hood, both models use the concept of skills, which are like component parts that build up bots. Now, what that means is you can combine some of these things together. So today, so this is an evolving picture, right? Because both these things are quite new. Power Virtual Agents is now GA, but Framework Composer may still be in preview. I can't remember right now, but both were just announced at the back end of last year. So both are sort of relatively new. But right now, you can take a skill that you've built in Bot Framework, not an entire bot, but you can build a skill in Bot Framework, and you can expose it in Power Virtual Agent. So you can build the skill in Composer, and you can modify it in code, and you can then expose it in Power Virtual Agents. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you're an organization, like a, say, decent sized organization, and you've got developers on staff, but you also have plenty of citizen developers who want to do this stuff themselves and understand the business processes and the business flows way better than dev do, said with love as someone who comes from dev, then actually have your developers build those complicated parts that are really specific to the business. So what does that look? Is it the ordering process of like the widgets that you know, talking to the weird legacy system to kind of query stock levels, right? Is that a skill that the dev team could build, package, and give to users using Power Virtual Agents? Because if so, what it means is that people in Power Virtual Agents can build bots all day long that execute flows, but also pull in this skill that the dev team have built in Bot Framework. And that's really powerful then, because then you've got both parts of the organization working together. You've got the best of both, really. You've got the flexibility of the code that you build in Bot Framework and Bot Framework Composer, and you've got the ease of use of PVA. You can't currently kind of easily do it the other way around. So you can't start writing something in Power Virtual Agents and get at the code. Like there isn't really a way to get at the code of what you've done in Power Virtual Agent in Power Virtual Agents. However, something that you've built in PVA, you sort of can access in Bot Framework because they use Dispatcher. So have a look at the link, but basically Dispatcher is a way of exposing your Power Virtual Agents or Bot Framework code via an API call, basically. And the idea is that then it makes it easier to be consumed by lots of other things that may not fall into the official channels, but everything talks API, so you can kind of invoke your bot that way. So you can do it that way by having Bot Framework invoke a PVA bot, but it's a bit black box. Like it's fine, it works, it's just not the nice story that doing it the other way around is. And that sort of makes sense, because why would you want to do that necessarily? Maybe if you started with something of a proof of concept and you wanted to then work backwards into Bot Framework, then it might be useful to start here. Or maybe you're building a kind of big master bot of bots, and so you want to kind of combine lots of different bots together, and some of them are Bot Framework and some of them are Power Virtual Agents. So there are reasons why you might want to do it, but kind of in general, like it's not, like it's fine, it works, but it's not the best, right? Okay, so coming kind of towards the end, I've deliberately kind of left some time for questions, so be thinking about that. Bot Framework Composer versus Power Virtual Agents. Well, it's kind of both, right? There is no one is better than the other. You could use either. It kind of depends on the situation about which is best, which is kind of naturally a better choice for the things you're trying to do. So the answer is kind of just consider what's best for you, what's best for your users, what's best for the situation. Remember that you can use both. and that can be really powerful if you can figure out, which parts of your organization it would really benefit from having skills being wrapped around those business processes as skills. You've got a benefit then, because those skills can be reused in Bot Framework, but they could also be reused in virtual agents. So you can do both. There is some interaction, there is some crossover. I would also say this is a evolving picture. Like I'll keep saying it, these are both relatively new products. So we don't know what's going to happen kind of over time. It might be that, they work together more closely and there's more overlap. We'll just kind of have to see. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, there are two different ways of solving these problems. There are different approaches for different people. If you're very much into SaaS, if you don't kind of want to think too much about it, you just want to get something that works, especially if you're a heavy Power Automate user, I think you're going to love Power Virtual Agents. I think they're really powerful for doing that. If you want way more control, if you want to control everything, if you've already gone down the Bot Framework route, definitely go and have a look at Composer if you haven't already. It's hugely powerful. And then there's so much grey area in the middle that both camps can benefit from both solutions. And I think it's worth everybody understanding kind of and looking at both, because they both absolutely and massively have something to offer in terms of the kind of their strengths. Okay. That's a kind of whistle-stop tour. I've deliberately left some space for questions at the end, but thank you very much for listening. There is a breakout session immediately following this, so more than happy to kind of do more detailed kind of questions then, and we can kind of chat about it. But yeah, Andrew, are there indeed any questions? Who knows?
That's great. No, thanks. There's one just published it. Is it still deployed as an app service when using Composer?
Yes. So absolutely. So when using Bot Framework Composer, you're building it in the UI. You do that. You can test it in the UI. When you do that, it will open Bot Framework Emulator, just like it does with the code that you write, on desktop. And you can do that. When you're ready, a couple of different things you can do. You can export it as a zip file, which is the whole solution. You can then open that solution in Visual Studio. You can publish it to an Azure bot service that you've already got somewhere else. You can do it up as a website and then create your Bot Framework registration separately. There is also support inside Bot Framework Composer for doing all of those steps for you magically. So you can kind of click some buttons, hook it up to your Azure and say, go publish this. It will then create all the parts for you. The only thing I'm going to say about that is, and that's really good, like, don't get me wrong, it's a real kind of plus point. When you go and look at what it's done, when it's published, because it will publish it to resource groups, I always say go and have a look at what it's done, because by nature of it being a kind of catch-all UI, it may have published in some things that you don't necessarily need. So I'm thinking specifically like Lewis, depending on like the things you tick and you don't tick. If you're not using your Lewis, it may kind of end up publishing it anyway. I'm just telling you these things so when you look at it, you don't end up paying money for in Azure for things that you're not using, right? So I would say that's a good difference, where the Bot Framework Composer, I think, still requires you to have an element of understanding of what Bot Framework does under the hood. But yes, it's still an app service, it's still a bot registration. You can go and see all those things regardless of how you then go through that publishing process. That's very separate from Power Virtual Agents, which is a black box. You can't see under the hood of the black box. There's nothing in Azure for Power Virtual Agents.
Cool. Thanks for that. Don't know if anybody else wants to post any more questions just now. If not, we can do it in the breakout session. I'll paste the link just now. I'll leave it up for a few moments. But thanks, Tom. Thanks for taking your time out to present this. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining. And hopefully you can get some more info from the breakout session.
Yep. Yeah, no problems. And yeah, if this inspired you to go and create some bots, please do, using either of the two or a completely separate thing. If you get any questions, feel free to kind of hit me up. Some contact details are on the page as well if you get stuck. But yeah, definitely give it a go, because it's really surprising now how easy it is to make what was, even a few years ago, something quite complicated. So
That's something I need to look at playing around with, certainly. Not had a chance to do it yet, so yeah, it's given me some inspiration anyway.
Good.
Cool. Cheers all. I'll end the session now and open up the breakout.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Tom. Take care, everyone.